Have you ever looked truly carefully at old photographs of the 19th century? Not superficially flipping through pages of history textbooks, but with a magnifying glass, with a critical understanding of every detail. I am talking about those very pictures which are presented to us as documentary evidence of the era of great builders and industrial revolutions. Stop for a second and ask yourself one simple question that will destroy your entire worldview. Why do people in these photos look like random passers-by who have wandered onto the ruins of an alien, much more developed civilization? Why do their daily lives, their clothes, their technologies so flagrantly not correspond to the grandeur of the buildings against which they pose? We have been lied to our whole lives about who we are and where we came from. Official history is bursting at the seams. One only needs to pull out of it one brick of lies. And today we will pull out the most important brick. We will talk about why kings and emperors of the 19th century look like savages who have seized the empty palaces of gods. Look at St. Petersburg, at Paris, at Rome, or even at Chicago of the mid-19th century. What do you see? Grandiose structures with columns of solid granite, weighing hundreds of tons. St. Isaac's Cathedral, the Capitol, ancient temples which stand all over the world. Perfect geometry, the most complex engineering thought, stone processing at a level inaccessible even to modern CNC machines. And now lower your gaze. What is there at the foot of these colossi? Dirt, impassable mud, through which people trudge in bast shoes or rough boots, horses, carts, manure, and a complete lack of sewage. Do you really believe that a civilization capable of carving from granite a perfectly round column 20 meters high and weighing 114 tons could not pave the street in front of its creation? This is cognitive dissonance, which historians try to gloss over with beautiful fairy tales about serfdom and ingenious, self-taught individuals. Let's be honest. Before us is a picture of a post-apocalypse. People in photographs of the 1860s are not building these structures. They are occupying them. They resemble squatters who have settled into abandoned elite apartments. They hang their primitive signs, tavern or bakery, on facades decorated with bas-reliefs of incredible complexity. They insert crooked wooden frames into gigantic arched openings, which were clearly not intended for glass, but for something else. This is cargo cult in its purest form. Мы видим дикарей, которые нашли божественные артефакты и пытаются приспособить их под свой убогий быт. Они топят эти дворцы дровами, прорубая дыры для печных труб прямо через уникальную лепнину, потому что оригинальная система отопления, бестопливная и совершенная, им непонятна и недоступна. Они не знают, как это работает. Они просто выживают в стенах, которые построили не они. Официальная наука утверждает, что эти здания возводились при помощи зубила, молотка и такой-то матери. Нам говорят, что мужики в лаптях на веревках затаскивали Александровскую колонну. Вы пробовали посчитать физику этого процесса? Чтобы поднять вес в 600 тонн, нужны не просто веревки и блоки, нужна сложнейшая логистика, нужны дороги, способные выдержать такой груз, нужны механизмы, следов которых нет ни на одной гравюре, ни на одном фото. Где строительные краны? Где заводы по производству миллионов кирпичей идеального обжига? Где карьеры, из которых изъяли миллионы кубометров камня? Их нет. На фотографиях того времени мы видим только готовые шедевры и людей с лопатами, которые максимум способны выкопать канаву. Этот технологический разрыв невозможно объяснить эволюцией. Это не развитие, это деградация. Представьте, что через 200 лет археологи найдут современный смартфон в руках у племени из джунглей Амазонки. Будут ли они утверждать, что это племя создало микропроцессоры, используя палки и камни? Именно это нам и впаривают историки. Они заставляют нас верить, что примитивное общество, не имеющее антибиотиков, электричества и нормального транспорта, создавало архитектурные шедевры, которые мы сегодня не можем повторить даже с нашими лазерами и атомной энергией. Но самое страшное не в том, что они нам врут, Самое страшное в том, почему они это делают. Ведь если признать, что эти здания построены не нами, придется ответить на вопрос, а куда делись те, кто их строил, и почему мы заняли их место. Вглядитесь в лица на старых дагеротипах. В них нет гордости созидателей. В них есть растерянность и страх выживания. Это люди, пережившие катастрофу. Их мало. Города на фото середины XIX века пугающе пустынны. Огромные проспекты, рассчитанные на трафик в миллионы, стоят безлюдными. Редкие повозки выглядят жалко на фоне широченных магистралей. Это города-призраки, которые только начинают заселяться новыми жильцами. Нами. Мы — потомки тех, кто пришел на пепелище. We are those very savages who put on tailcoats and top hats to appear more important, but never understood the purpose of the devices we inherited. And right now, I will prove this to you with figures and facts at hand. Get ready, because next we will go where official science is afraid to look. In the next block, we will analyze the technical impossibility of what is written in textbooks. You will see that mathematics is the main enemy of fake history. Let's cast aside emotions and engage dry, ruthless logic. Let's take a calculator and simply calculate what they are too shy to tell us in school. Let's take St. Petersburg as an example, a city called a window to Europe, but which looks more like a monument to impossible technologies. The official version states that the city was built from scratch on swamps in an incredibly short time. We are told that Peter the Great brought thousands of peasants, and they, standing waist-deep in icy water, erected the imperial capital. But let's look at the volumes. We are talking not about tens, but about millions and billions of bricks. To build such a number of buildings in the historical center, industrial-scale factories operating around the clock were required. For firing bricks, fuel is needed. A lot of fuel. If you look at old maps and engravings of the surroundings of St. Petersburg from the 18th and 19th centuries, you will see a strange picture. There are no forests there. The area is bare, like a knee. Where did they get the wood for firing billions of bricks? Transporting it on carts for hundreds of kilometers over impassable roads? This is a logistical absurdity that makes construction golden and impossible in terms of deadlines. But brick is only half the problem. Let's talk about granite. Take a walk along the Neva embankments. You see kilometers of granite parapets, perfectly fitted to each other. Polygonal masonry, where you cannot even slip a razor blade between stones weighing several tons. We are told that this was done manually with chisels. Have you ever tried working with granite? It is one of the hardest rocks on the planet. When struck with a chisel, it crumbles, chips, but by no means cuts like butter. But what we see are precisely cuts. Perfectly smooth surfaces that can only be obtained with diamond-coated circular saws and enormous rotation speed, and polishing. The granite columns of St. Isaac's Cathedral have a mirror polish. Manually, by rubbing the stone with sand, you will never achieve such geometry. You will get a wavy, uneven surface. Here, however, is a perfect cylinder. This is machine processing. Lathes of gigantic sizes. Where are they? Where did they disappear to? Why do museums show us rusty saws and wooden mallets, claiming that these were the very tools used to create masterpieces that we cannot replicate today? Let's move on. The Tsar bathtub in Babelovsky Park. A bowl made from a solid piece of granite weighing 48 tons, walls as thin as a shell, perfectly smooth. Officially, Master Samson Sukhanov carved it over several years. Can you imagine the material stress? One wrong hammer stroke, one micro crack, and years of work are wasted. To make such a bathtub, layers of stone must be removed uniformly around the entire circumference. Otherwise, the internal tension will tear the workpiece apart. It is impossible to do this manually. This is a technology resembling 3D printing or high-precision milling. But they continue to tell us tall tales about men with golden hands. This is an insult to our intelligence. They force us to believe that a handful of illiterate people, unfamiliar with material resistance, created engineering marvels. And now look at the ergonomics of these buildings. This is perhaps the most obvious proof that we live in someone else's homes. Pay attention to the doors in old mansions. Their handles are often located at chest level or even higher for a modern person. The steps of staircases in some palaces and temples are so high that they are uncomfortable to climb. They are designed for the stride of a being whose height significantly exceeds ours. Huge arched openings, ceilings 5 to 6 meters high. Why? Try heating such a room with firewood in a harsh Russian winter. All the warm air will rise to the ceiling, and the people below will freeze. This is physics. If people of the 19th century had built these buildings for themselves, they would have built low ceilings to conserve heat. That's how they built in villages. But in palaces, we see a complete disregard for the climate. This means only one thing. Either the climate was different, subtropical, when these buildings were constructed, or the builders had an energy source about which we know nothing. Atmospheric electricity, ether technologies. Fireplaces in these buildings often lack chimneys or are made in such a way that burning wood in them means carbon monoxide poisoning. These are not stoves. These are resonators, parts of a complex system from which the heart was torn out, and we now use the empty shell, burning logs within it. Another fact that blows the mind is the absence of construction debris and cultural layers. When you build a city, the soil becomes saturated with fragments, shavings, broken bricks. But archaeologists digging in the centers of old cities stumble upon an astonishing thing. Buildings go deep underground. These are those very buried ground floors, which are explained to us as a cultural layer. We are told that 3 meters of dirt from shoe soles accumulated in 200 years. Are you serious? 3 meters. That is the height of an entire floor. For the ground level to rise so high, the city must have stood abandoned for 1,000 years, or something catastrophic must have happened. A mudslide, a clay rain, a flood of biblical proportions. Look at the windows that stick out from under the asphalt. These are full-fledged windows with frames and glass. Who in their right mind would build windows into the ground? We are told these are basements for coal. With windows? With grand entrances that have now turned into pits? No, friends. These are former ground floors. Cities were covered. And those very people in the 19th century photographs are survivors who simply cleared the upper levels and started living there. They did not build these buildings. They dug them out. We are approaching the most interesting part. If those whom we are presented as builders did not have the construction technologies, then who built all of this? And most importantly, where did the billions of people who inhabited this planet before us go? Because to create such global antique architecture, which is identical in Australia, America, and Europe, a unified civilizational space and a huge population are needed. But 19th century statistics show us an empty world. Let's look at the graph of Earth's population growth. This is not just a curve, it is evidence that screams of a planetary scale crime. They draw us a smooth, almost horizontal graph for thousands of years, and then, suddenly, in the mid-19th century, a vertical takeoff occurs. They convince us that this is the result of improved medicine and hygiene. What medicine? In the 19th century, hand-washing only began towards the end of the century, and the main remedies were bloodletting and mercury. Mortality was monstrous. So where did this explosive growth come from? The mathematics of a biological species tells us that such doubling and tripling of a population in a short time is naturally impossible. Women could not give birth to 10 children, all 10 of whom would survive, in unsanitary conditions. This means we were either brought in or raised. Recall a phenomenon that historians speak of through gritted teeth. The mid-19th century is the era of orphans. Across the world, from New York to Moscow, gigantic orphanages are opening. In the United States of America, so-called Orphan trains circulated, transporting hundreds of thousands of parentless children to farms. Where did millions of children without adults come from? Where are their parents? An epidemic? A war? But official reports contain no conflicts capable of destroying the entire adult population, leaving children alive. This looks like the colonization of an empty planet by a new batch of biorobots. We were simply dropped into this world, given primitive knowledge, dressed in rough clothes and told, live. We are a civilization of orphans, not remembering our lineage. This is precisely why we have no genetic memory of how to build these palaces. We arrived to find everything ready-made, and this brings us to the most terrible event, the traces of which we tread upon every day. A global catastrophe. That very cataclysm which alternative theorists call the clay flood or mud rain. This is not a myth. This is geology. Look at the Polytechnic Museum in Moscow, or at buildings in Kazan, in Omsk. Everywhere the same picture. The ground floors are buried under clay and soil. This is not a cultural layer. Clay is a sedimentary rock. It does not come from thin air and rotten bast shoes. To bury cities under several meters of homogeneous clay, a flow of water and soil of colossal power is needed. Probably there was a pole shift, a breakthrough of gigantic underground reservoirs, or the fall of a celestial body that caused a tsunami which circled the entire globe, washing away the old civilization and silting up its majestic cities. And what happened then? Then the cleanup crews arrived. Those very 19th century wars, which are described to us as heroic battles with cavalry and cannons, were in fact operations to finish off survivors and destroy the remnants of high technologies. Take the fire of Moscow in 1812. We are told that the city was set on fire by its own inhabitants, but eyewitnesses describe a strange light, instantaneous combustion of stone and metal, illnesses resembling radiation sickness among Napoleon's soldiers. Stone does not burn from a wooden splinter. Brick does not melt in an ordinary fire to the state of glass. And in the forts of Kronstadt and on the ruins of ancient fortresses, we see precisely melted brick and granite. These are traces of the use of high-temperature plasma weapons. We were bombed. From orbit or from the air, it doesn't matter. What matters is that history was rewritten, calling a total cleansing of the territory the Patriotic War. We live in a post-apocalyptic world. Those very beautiful buildings, palaces and cathedrals, they are not just dwellings. They are technical structures. Temples with their domes, gold plating and spires are atmospheric power stations. They generated energy from the ether, from atmospheric electricity, providing free light and heat to cities. The crosses on the domes are not symbols of faith in the way they are presented to us now. They are antenna resonators. Look at their shape. They are diagrams. But after the catastrophe, the knowledge was lost or deliberately removed. The new masters of the world, those who seized power over the surviving savages, flipped the switch. They removed the equipment, took it away, and repurposed the buildings as places of worship or administrative offices. Imagine this cynicism. People were driven into cold stone boxes which previously heated themselves and forced to burn coal and wood, polluting the atmosphere. We were given hydrocarbon burning technologies, primitive, dirty, slave-like technologies, so that we would depend on resources. Free energy was forbidden. That's why 19th century fashion is so absurd. These corsets, crinolines, tailcoats. This is a cargo cult, an attempt to imitate images of previous masters without understanding the meaning of their attire. People suffocated in these clothes, fainted, but wore them because the elite commanded it. An elite who perhaps knew the truth but remained silent. We look at star forts scattered across the earth. Officially, these are fortifications for defense against raids. But any military engineer will tell you that such a shape, a star with many rays, is meaningless for defense. It is an ideal shape for a wave circuit, for generating or receiving a signal. These are gigantic microchips on the body of the planet, and they are destroyed, blown up, buried under Earth. Someone very diligently erased the traces of that civilization from the face of the Earth, so that we would think we are the pinnacle of creation, having crawled out of a cave. But the truth is that we are degraded descendants, or artificially created slaves, living on the ruins of gods. And this realization causes not just shock, it causes rage. For if our history was stolen from us, then our future was stolen as well. Now that we have realized the physical impossibility of the official version and seen the traces of a global cleanup, it is time to look into the darkest abyss of this conspiracy. We must understand exactly how we were brainwashed. After all, the substitution of architecture is just the tip of the iceberg. The main operation was carried out not with stone, but with our consciousness. Have you ever caught yourself thinking, while walking through a historic center, that these buildings evoke a strange, inexplicable nostalgia in you? As if you returned home, but forgot the keys. This is not just aesthetic pleasure. This is the cry of your genetic memory. Your subconscious remembers that this world was different, harmonious and free. But your consciousness, having gone through the grinder of the school curriculum, puts up a block and whispers, "This was built by serfs with a chisel." We underwent an informational lobotomy. Look at how the education system, implemented universally precisely in the 19th century, is structured. This is the Prussian model, created not for nurturing creators, but for mass-producing obedient performers. We are taught to memorize dates of battles and names of czars who perhaps never existed, but we are not taught to think, compare, and analyze. We were forbidden to ask the question, how? How did they do it? We are given a ready answer, genius, and that should be enough. Any attempt to doubt the official dogma is branded as ignorance. This is the Matrix's defense mechanism. The system protects itself, ridiculing those who try to awaken others. Recall the so-called World's Fairs of the second half of the 19th century. Paris, Chicago, St. Louis, Nizhny Novgorod. We are told that these fantastic cities of snow-white stone, with columns, domes, fountains, and electric lighting, were built from, attention, plaster, and tow in a couple of months, only to be demolished afterwards. Do you believe this? Look at the photographs of these exhibitions. This is monumental antique architecture. These are hundreds of hectares of ideal development. And we are told that these were temporary decorations? No. This was a demonstration of the remnants of past grandeur before their final destruction. The elite needed to legitimize these objects so that they could then destroy them under the pretext of closing the exhibition. This was an act of ritual destruction of technologies. They showed wireless trams, moving sidewalks, faxes, and video communication back in the 19th century. And then all of this disappeared, only to be reinvented 100 years later and sold to us for money. We were turned into consumers of resources that used to be free. Electricity, water, heat, all of this was provided by the environment itself, tuned to the etheric fields of the planet. Palaces were machines for living, and we were relocated to concrete hives, disconnected from the source, and had meters installed. This is the essence of the Great Reset. To turn gods into slaves. Make it so that we spend our entire lives surviving, paying a mortgage for a concrete box that will fall apart in 50 years, while next to us stand eternal buildings that we cannot even restore without losing quality. This is a mockery of us. Every time you pay for electricity, you pay a tax for ignorance, for having forgotten how to draw energy from the air, as the builders of St. Isaac's Cathedral did. Emotionally, it is very difficult to accept this. A feeling of powerlessness and rage arises. We were not deceived yesterday. We have been deceived for several generations already. Our great-grandparents already lived in this lie, and they passed it on to us as truth. The chain of memory was broken. Perhaps those very orphan trains were the moment of rupture. Children who do not know the past are ideal material for building a new society, convenient for the masters. They were given new surnames, new books, a new history, where man is an accident descended from an ape, and not the pinnacle of cosmic engineering. They instilled in us an inferiority complex. They tell us, look how people lived before. Dirt, plague, inquisition. But architecture says the opposite. Architecture cries out about the highest culture, about hygiene, remember Roman baths and aqueducts, working for millennia, about incredible aesthetics. Someone is very afraid that we will remember. That is why archives are being destroyed. That is why libraries are burning. The fire at the Indian Library in Moscow, fires in libraries in the USA and Europe, these are not accidents. This is the cleansing of inconvenient books that might have survived. On paper, it is easy to rewrite history, but stone cannot lie. And that is why they so diligently restore old buildings, often covering ancient masonry with plaster, knocking off superfluous symbols, changing domes. They are reflashing artifacts. They are trying to erase the fingerprints of the real builders, but an all in a sack cannot be hidden. We are waking up. We are starting to see inconsistencies. Do you feel this? This feeling that you have been robbed. Not money was stolen from you. Your grandeur was stolen from you. They made you believe that you are small people, dependent on the system. But looking at these palaces, you must understand, whoever built this was a giant of thought and spirit. And if you live here, it means their blood flows in you, even if dormant. We are the heirs of an empire that was erased from maps, but could not be erased from the face of the earth. We walk on the ruins of Tartaria, Atlantis, call it what you will. The essence is not in the name, the essence is in the level of development. And now, as the veil falls from our eyes, the main question arises. What should we do with this truth? Just be angry? No. This knowledge should transform us.